Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Martin Luther King Day to you.
Same to you, sir.
So I know who you are, of course, but can you tell a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, Jerry Girley, Pastor Jerry Girley, civil rights advocate, civil rights lawyer. I've been practicing civil rights law for 17 years in Orlando, Florida.
I guess we can get straight into it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we're living the dream?
Well, short answer is it's mixed. 2008, we elected the first black president of the United States. We were all very hopeful. We can't say that that's not significant progress, but then shortly after that, we had the formation of the Tea Party, right? We had the birthers, we have the Freedom Party, we have the proliferation of laws passed in southern states that make it difficult for black people to vote. So it's a mixed bag, but on balance, not so much living the dream as we should be.
What can be done to protect the dream?
Well, I think we have to understand that it's an ongoing struggle, that there's never a point that we reach this finish line and all the work is done. So, in short, what's necessary is sobriety. Or, if I'm putting it in biblical parlance, watchfulness.
Please tell me what you mean when you say clarify what the dream actually means.
Well, I think people have said that Dr. King wanted us to be able to live in a color-blind society. I think that that's a misread of Dr. King's vision, his dream. I think really what he wanted was for us to live in a color-neutral society. And when I say color-neutral, what I mean is one in which people don't incur penalty or privilege on the basis of their skin color.
So you just mentioned that you don't think that Martin Luther King believed in living in a color-blind society.
Right.
Why are you against it?
Well, for the reasons that I mentioned. For one thing, in terms of faith, we understand that that being black is not a curse, and being white is not a blessing. There's diversity in God's universe, and there's diversity in God's world, and all forms of diversity, certainly human beings are created in his image, are to be celebrated, not ignored.
As we move forward in the 21st century, what is the most important question that Americans of goodwill should be asking themselves?
Well, I think the most important question is, which direction are we trending in? And let me explain what I mean. If we were to say, for example, and this is just a random number, that the stock market closed at 2,500 shares yesterday, or 25,000 shares. Well, that's one data point, but what we really need to know is what was the closing point the day before, the week before. So then if we get that additional data point and we know that in the previous day or the previous week, the market closed at 40,000 shares, then that tells us something very important. We're
Right.
trending in the wrong direction. So in terms of this whole conversation about race, the question is, which way are we trending?
Right. Can you speak more about the importance of knowing which way we're trending?
Yeah, so obviously just the example that I just gave, because if we're trending in the right direction, then obviously we want to maintain that, right?
Right.
And we want to build on that. We want to reinforce the positives. If we're trending, however, in the wrong direction, which I think we are in this country in the year 2024 and certainly in the year 2023, and arguably since the George Floyd massacre, or rather not massacre but murder, and all of the mayhem and all of the upheaval that happened as a result of that, we have been trending in the wrong direction. We've been suppressing the conversation in this country about race to the point of even criminalizing it, right? To the point of saying that we can't talk about race in public schools, particularly here in Florida. Everything is wrongfully lumped under the heading of critical race theory, when in fact that's something that's taught at law school, right? So, but we don't want to talk about race. W. Du Bois wrote a book or a piece back in the late 1800s called The Souls of Black Folk. And what he projected back then was the most important line going forward into the 20th century would be the color line. But what he said is that Americans have a habit of just growing tired of discussing the issue of race. And so we just shove it, and we artificially and inaccurately declare ourselves to have been cured from the problem of race, when in fact race continues to be a problem in this country, and we're trending in the wrong direction.
Can you explain what you mean when you say that the struggle is cyclical?
Yeah, so one of our challenges is understanding why we keep revisiting the same issues. When I say cyclical, when most people hear the term civil rights, we're thinking in terms of the 1960s, but the first series of civil rights laws that were passed in this country happened right after slavery came to an end. So there was a Civil Rights Act of 1866, and there was a Civil Rights Act of 1875. But what most people don't realize is that in 1883, the United States Supreme Court substantially eroded or knocked down or essentially took away the Civil Rights Act of 1875. And thereafter, we went backwards. So we see ourselves going in circles. We make progress and then we lose progress. And it's pretty predictable. There's a pretty predictable cycle. And right now, we're trending in the wrong direction.
So how do we straighten out the circle or cycle of justice or injustice?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I find myself pondering that often. But again, I think it goes back to first of all, identifying that is what's going on, that there is a cycle. And I've lectured on this before, and I say that there's 4 stages to that cycle. If we're looking at and thinking in terms of a clock, the face of a clock, at high noon, that's when oppression is most effective. Let's think in terms of slavery. Then from 12 to 12:15, we're engaging the oppressor, the dominant group, in a conversation to get them to acknowledge that there is a wrong that needs to be righted. So what happens is once we get to 12:15, then we've accomplished what is called confession.
Okay.
So we go from oppression to confession. And that's where there's an acknowledgement that we need to change. Then once we all are in agreement, that is those in power and those who are previously have been oppressed or enslaved, once we all are in agreement that change needs to occur, then what happens from 12:15 to 12:30, again using this metaphor of the clock, is progression or progress. We're making progress. We're passing laws. We're making declarations. We're instituting executive orders. The president is mandating that all departments under his or her control are going to resist and going to reject all forms of racial and gender and other forms of oppression. So we're making progress. But then where we begin to lose it is that we don't realize that there's always going to be this resistant, this intractable group of citizens who feels that America is for a set group to benefit from and everyone else to serve their narrow interests and their narrow goals. Some would say that it's an oligarchy. Some would say that it's simply an economic system of oppression that favors people of a certain skin color, of a certain heritage, particularly of Western European heritage. However you want to categorize it, there are people who hold that view. They've held that view since the end of slavery, and they continue to hold that view. And the thing is, while we are out celebrating the progress, they're planning to recapture lost ground. So because we are not always watchful and mindful, we slip from progression to regression. And so if we're staying with our clock for a moment, from 12:30 to 11:45, we are regressing. And there's thoughts such as what is called reverse discrimination. There's attacks on affirmative action because those policies that were put in place to lift up the oppressed are now seen as unfair privilege and unfair benefit, when in fact they're simply restoring, repairing the harm that was previously done. But those policies and those laws are successfully mischaracterized and demonized when we're in that period of aggression, right? And then when we get to 11:45, from 11:45 back to 12, we're in a cycle trending toward oppression. And so we see this cycle happening again and again and again. And right now, arguably, the hand on the clock is somewhere around 1240 in my thinking. So we have to understand that this cycle exists first and foremost before we can then identify a means of straightening it out. And one of the things that we have to consider is that all people are not for progress. There are some people who will never be convinced that it's important that all people have equal opportunity. There are some people in all racial groups that have always been convinced of that and have always worked toward that. So those, then, the people of goodwill, whoever they are, whatever communities they are part of, have to resolve within themselves that they're going to have to work together continually to reestablish progress and to guard against regression.
Can you talk about how faith helps us and fear hinders us?
Yeah, so I think that faith ultimately tells us that there's a higher purpose for us all being on planet Earth, and that we are all created in the likeness and the image of God, and therefore we must treat each other with respect, because to respect each other, in fact, is to respect God. To plot and to plan against each other and to seek to injure and to oppress each other, in fact, is seeking to oppress God himself. That might seem striking, but in Jesus' teachings, he said that on that day when human beings stand in front of the judgment seat of Christ and give an account for how they live their lives, he's going to say to some, I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was naked and I was cold and you didn't clothe me. I was in the hospital and you didn't visit me. I was in prison and then you didn't come to see about me. And they're going to say, when did that happen? We would have never done that to you, Jesus. We love you, Jesus. And he's going to say, when you did it to the least of them, you did it to me. So there's a tangible aspect to this faith that requires us to love and to respect and to care about the least among us. And faith encourages us to do that. Now, on the other hand, fear causes us to suspect and dislike and distrust people who are not like us in terms of our culture, in terms of our religious convictions, in terms of our color. Fear drives us from the purpose of God. Faith elevates us to the plane of God's purpose and his plan for humanity.
Can you define fear in the sense that you're using it right now?
Yeah, in the sense that I'm using the term fear in the sense that we are experiencing as it's washing over America on this day that we paused as a nation to celebrate Dr. King's holiday. Fear in the sense that I use the term is this irrational belief that someone or something is attempting to harm you and or the people that you love. And what happens with that irrational belief is that it creates a resolve or a determination to defeat and, if necessary, to destroy that imagined enemy. And sometimes, and tragically, and I think frighteningly, and that means that we turn our ire against our fellow Americans. It's concerning. It's deeply concerning.
So why do you think certain people are using fear tactics to undermine the pursuit of justice?
Well, short answer, sir, is that fear works. It absolutely moves people much quicker than trying to elevate them to a higher intellectual, spiritual plane. Fear works. It animates people. But the danger with using fear to animate is that those who embrace fear as an animating force will ultimately be annihilated by the same. Fear can never build. It can only destroy, tear down.
That's good. Heard you say in the past that there are two ways that a person can gain political power. What are those?
Vision and division. Vision is, again, saying, look, there's a higher purpose, there's a higher plan. There's a way that we can all get what we need There's more than enough for all to survive. If we can work together, if we can love people in the way that God loved us and loves us, if we can learn to value every human being, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to achieve that higher purpose. That's vision. It takes effort to get people to see the vision. We appeal to a visceral, in the sense that Sigmund Freud talked about the id, the ego, and the superego, the id being the monster or the animal in us. Mm-hmm. We appeal to the id when we take the fear approach. Mm. And therefore the id responds and behaves in that way, in that idiotic fashion. So we see people behaving, and I mean that in the technical sense, in a visceral, animal almost like manner.
So it would be safe to say that you feel like fear is tied into division?
100%. Division and fear are partners. They complement it, if that could be said of fear. But yes, they go hand in hand.
What would you say of some of our Christian brothers and sisters who say that they're doing the work of the Lord and they're trying to restore it back to its Christian roots?
It concerns me when I hear some of my brothers and sisters in Christ, because I consider myself to be a Christian evangelical. As you know, I've been an ordained minister for 38 years, pastor. It concerns me when I hear my brothers and sisters in Christ say they have the love of Jesus in their heart, but they hate or they have disdain for their fellow human beings who are not like them culturally, racially, who coming from countries that are in distress. When they talk about those people, whoever they are, those people poisoning the blood of America, that kind of hatred or that kind of disdain is antithetical to the mission and the purpose of Christ, as I understand it, as the Bible explains it. Jesus said, by our love one for another will men know that you are my disciples, that God in fact sent me. So when we operate in hate under a banner of Christianity, we besmirch the reputation of Jesus himself. So I'm deeply concerned. I would ask my brothers and sisters inside of our house of faith. See, I'm not throwing rocks from outside the house. I'm inside the house. I'm wanting to have a conversation with my Christian brothers and sisters, some of them who are white, many of them who are white. How is it that we can gather under this banner of the cross and yet disdain and dislike so many people and be known for that more so than our love?
Mm. What would you say is the ultimate danger of trying to build anything based on fear?
Well, I think I said it earlier, that fear is an animator, but it can't build or construct anything, and it annihilates everything ultimately that it touches. And I offer as a case study Hitler in Germany.
Can we discuss a little bit what you mean when you use the word faith?
Yeah. So faith, to me, is the idea that we are all created in the likeness and the image of God. We're here to serve his divine purpose. That God is omnipotent. He's all-knowing. That God has a plan. Success is not defined by what myself as an individual or maybe even us collectively as a group wants. It's defined by understanding that God has this eternal plan that transcends time, but yet it has different emphasis in different segments of time. So faith is believing that he's in control and that what is right, what is proper, what is fair, what is just is going to be done. And then finding our role in this segment of time as God works to bring justice to his world. And since our country is in his world, narrowly, what is our role in God's overall plan in this country at this time?
I've heard in the past you say that faith makes people hopeful, but fear makes people hateful. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. And I've been talking about that so far. But I know that there are people out there who dislike me and people who look like me because of the color of our skin, because of my ancestry, because of my parents' ancestry, my African ancestry. I know that there are people who think that they're inherently superior to me. And I know people who are trying to roll back the civil rights clock on us. And for example, I know that last year in Florida, we lost a black congressional district. I know that in Florida, laws were passed to make it essentially illegal to teach black history. I know that things are happening to try to push us back. If my confidence was in the law, if it was in the systems of government, I would be distressed. But I'm hopeful because there is a God who sits on an omnipotent throne. Dr. King said it once, and I don't know if it was his original quote, but he said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And the reason why it bends toward justice is because God is controlling the moral arc of the universe. So I'm not just talking about the universe in the impersonal sense as I hear some people talking about it. I'm talking about God. God requires in the end that justice be done. And so therefore, I'm hopeful. If not in my generation, not in my time, in my son's time, and my daughter's time, and their sons and daughters' time, my study of history, and I'm a student of history, shows me time and again that whatever is just and right is going to be done. But conversely, what fear does is it causes you to turn off and to divorce your emotions from your cognitive process. And all you're doing, therefore, is some type of animalistic muscle memory trying to survive. Someone has pushed that survival button inside of you that we all have, right?
Right.
And it's severed or seared that emotion that from your cognitive, your thinking, your higher logical self, and now all you're doing is seeing enemies and obstacles that you've got to defeat or to destroy. Fear makes us hateful, people that you are resenting because they're trying to take something from you. It's a narrative that is very effective, but it's a lie. If I'm putting my biblical hat on, the Bible says that the devil is the accuser of the brethren, and that's what he's doing. He wants to accuse you in my mind, and he wants to accuse me in your mind, and we're at odds with each other when in fact neither one of us are doing or thinking the things that we think the other is doing or thinking. But in the meantime, we're tearing down our house. And what deeply concerns me is that there is a wave of fear, irrational fear, that's washing over this country. And the end result will be that we will tear down our own house.
In the context of our conversation today, would it be appropriate to say that faith leads to vision, but fear leads to division?
Absolutely. I couldn't say it more succinctly, so I'll leave it right there.
Thank you for your time. What is something that people should take away? What should they be doing? What should they be animated to do?
Well, that's a good question, because obviously everyone can't be Dr. King or any one of those other John Lewis or Malcolm X, but you can be who God positioned you to be. Approach life with the understanding that this divine God, all-knowing, all-powerful, positions us as human beings in spaces where we can be people of influence. And in our spaces where God has divinely positioned us, we will come into contact with injustice. And when we see it, call it out. Isaiah, the 59th chapter of the book of Isaiah, when the people of God were praying and they were wondering why God wasn't answering their prayers, and they were saying that we were doing all of the ceremonial things that we typically do. We go to the temple, we make sacrifices, we make our donations, we make our long prayers, and the response was, none calls for justice. So in your own space, using the language of Dr. King, be a drum major for justice in your own way, in your own sphere of influence. Bring people, invite people to conversations of inclusion and equality. Resist the wave of fear, the irrational fear that's washing over this country. Stand up for what is just. Stand up for right where you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.